Maybe if I go to the participants list. Would you mind, Madam Chair, if I ask the Affordable Housing Trust members to raise their hands electronically so that we can see them on the participants list? That might help me.
Okay, please. Per Brooke's comment, could anyone we have to see when we're getting to a quorum on the Affordable Housing Trust so they can also start their meeting after we start the Finance Committee meeting. So if you please raise your hands with the raised hand. And then that way Brooke can see you.
And Brian is on, so he can.
Okay. And what's your quorum number, Brooke?
Quorum is 4.
Okay. So you're 4. You're already at a quorum. Or no, you're at 3.
We're at 3. I have polled and I believe we're going to be 4.
Okay.
So we're waiting for Penny Dye, who said she expects to be here. So.
And just to start, my normal friendly reminder, if you're on with only one name, unless you're Madonna, I need you to put your last name on, please. So Megan, that would be you. And the person, Christina, I need you to change your K to your name, please.
Hey there, this is Megan Perry. I'm currently driving, so as soon as I'm at a spot where I can pull over, I will certainly put my last name on there, but just so you know, it's Megan Perry.
Let me see if I can do it for you. I'll try. And if I can, then you're good.
Denise, I can do it.
Okay, Brian, then you can do it. Thank you.
May I ask a quick question before you get going with the meeting?
Nope. No, sorry, Megan.
No?
We have to wait and do things properly. Sorry, nope. I'm a stickler for protocol. You can do it in the public comment
Okay,
section.
thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a Stephen Maury? 1. I think we have a quorum for Finance Committee. There's Stephen. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
And Peter. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Hi, George. Okay, we have a quorum. What time is it? And it's 4 o'clock. We will start promptly at 4 today. I am calling to order the Finance Committee meeting of March 8th, and I'm going to read the script for remotely conducted open meetings. We are now using Zoom webinar for meetings, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. People registering to be an attendee must use their names, otherwise they will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. Attendees will join in listening mode. They can click the raise hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order they were raised, and all questions will be directed through the chair. As a preliminary matter, this is Denise Cronow, Chair of the Nantucket Finance Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative, and I will do it in the order in which I see you. Peter McEachern.
Here.
Thank you. Peter Schaefer.
Here.
George Harrington. You're muted, George. Thank you. Joe Grouse.
Here.
I have to go to the next screen to see everybody. Sorry, folks. Let's see. Stephen Maury.
Here.
Thank you. And that's it on Finance Committee. Okay. I'm going to apologize in advance for the tediousness of me trying to scroll between more than one screen to see people. So, okay, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. And again, in the order in which I see you, Ken Bogrand.
Present.
Thank you, Ken. Brian Turbot.
In attendance.
Thank you, Brian. Libby Gibson.
In attendance.
Thank you. Tucker Holland.
Here.
Thank you. Rick Sears.
Present.
Thank you. And Terry Norton.
I'm here.
Thank you, Terry. Okay. All right. So. Good evening.
Denise,
Yes.
excuse me, Denise, the Affordable Housing Trust does have a quorum. if I could
Yes,
open the
but I'm
meeting.
not through with the, thank you, Brian, but I'm not through with the announcements yet. So when I get through with the announcements, I will let you open your meeting. Thank you. Good evening. This open meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment as previously noted. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda, but before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members asking, or I will just ask the members if they to raise their hand if they have any questions. For any response, please wait until I yield the floor to you. And if you wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. Okay, Brian, as chair of Affordable Housing Trust, would you please open your meeting?
Yes, thank you. As a hard act to follow, I would like to defer to your reading of the state's mandate, if that's acceptable.
It's fine by me.
Okay, great. The members of the Affordable Housing Trust, if you can note that you can hear me, Christy Farnella.
Christy, could you hear
I
Brian?
could,
Okay.
We can't hear you, Christy.
maybe a little connectivity for Christy. I'll move to Brooke Moore. Can you hear us?
I'm here.
Here.
Great. I'll come back to Christy one more try.
Can you hear me now? Great.
Yes, we'll turn to the first on the agenda, which is to open the meeting.
And Brian is gone, so Brooke, over to you to.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Bear with me one second. I'm going to open our agenda on my screen. And so we have convened an open session and our agenda item is review and discussion of the 2021 annual town meeting warrant articles 23, 24, 38, and 97. So we'll allow the Finance Committee to move. We'll just be here in the background.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. Okay, shutting off my phone so we don't have to listen to my text laughing. Okay, call to order. Just a reminder, audio and video taping. May I have an approval of the agenda?
So made.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. By roll call, Jill Veith,
Aye.
Peter Schaefer,
Aye.
George Harrington. Okay, Joe Grouse,
Aye.
Stephen Morey,
Aye.
and I think that's it.
Denise, I joined the call as well. It's Chris.
Oh, thank you, Chris. You weren't showing up on my first screen. So Chris Glowacki.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay,
Denise
yes.
and Peter McEachern.
Oh, Peter, I'm sorry. You're not on my screen again still. This is,
You're on mine.
Well, thank you, Peter. Okay, agenda has been approved, and Denise, unanimous approval. Okay, now this is public comment for any of the articles that are not being discussed tonight or this afternoon. And the articles being discussed today, just as a reminder for everyone, is number 21, county assessment, 22, finalizing the county budget, 23, and 24, both are affordable housing trust funds from the select board appropriations. 38, Arthur Reed, affordable and year-round housing stabilization fund, and 97, Brooke Moore et al., home rule petition, land bank, real estate transfer fee. So if anyone has a comment outside of those, now's the time to raise your hand. No hands raised. I will close the public comment. Okay. So just a couple things, folks, before we get started. As most of you know, the town email was unavailable for a few days. And the last emails I was able to see was actually probably in the afternoon of Thursday. So I have gotten subsequently today many emails, as you can imagine, as I'm sure everyone in the town has now that it's back up and running. So to that end, many of you, there have been many emails in regards to particularly Article 97. So until we have a chance to review all of those emails as a finance committee and see them, tonight we are going to discuss each one of the warrant articles in respect of affordable housing. However, we will not make motions on them this evening until we have had a chance to go through everything that's been sent in by everybody. So just some ground rules. We will go ahead and take a look at Articles 21 and 22, the county assessment and the county budget. We'll start with that first. And then we'll move on. And Joe Grouse, when we get to the affordable housing, then I will ask you to recuse yourself. But you can stay on for 21 and 22, please. Thank you.
Got it.
Madam Chair,
Yes, who's
I
asking?
actually had those on the agenda for Thursday, not for tonight.
Pardon, Brian?
We had 21 and 22, the county budget, on the agenda for Thursday night, not specifically for tonight.
Oh, okay. So we are not reviewing 21 and 22 tonight. I honestly thought they were tonight because this was going to be an easy one, Brian. That was my idea. But moving right along. Okay, so then the first one up is actually Select Board Appropriation Affordable Housing Trust Fund, $475,000. Now, and Joe, I'm going to let you, yes, please.
Yes, I'm just going to say that for the record that Joe Grouse, I'm recusing myself from the Articles 23, 24, 38, and 97 due to my association with Habitat for Humanity, which receives funding from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Thank you, Joe. And then, so any questions or comments you have subsequent to this, you will be private citizen Joe Grouse. So
Correct.
thank you. And you'll do it during the public comment section of the discussion. Thank you.
Leave meeting. I'm gonna leave.
And everyone, you please have to mute as well. That would be great. So I forgot to announce that. Thank you. Okay, so Tucker and I had a chat this afternoon, and I have asked him to give us some background as to where we stand on some of the affordable housing topics prior to us reviewing these articles, because I think it's helpful to kind of set a baseline for everyone. So with that, Tucker, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you, and I will ask Rick to screen share the document that you helpfully sent us this afternoon. Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think the document is coming up, or can you all see it at this point?
Not yet.
Oh, here we go. So this is just there are 2 pages here. The first page relates to where we are with respect to safe harbor, a topic on a lot of people's mind. As everyone knows, the state requires every municipality to have 10% of its year-round housing eligible for the subsidized housing inventory. In our case, that equates to 490 units. That number will get reset following the recent decennial census. Once those numbers are combed through and a new year-round housing figure is formally determined, our estimate might be that that would happen around this time next year. So until then, or whatever point they issue the new official number, 490 is what we are aiming for. Anecdotally, we don't expect that number to change dramatically. There actually is a chance it may go down a little versus up, given the number of year-round homes that have been purchased in recent years by investors or as seasonal homes. So presently, officially on our subsidized housing inventory list, we have 199 units. There are actually an additional 50 units at Richmond as part of their first phase, which should be coming online relatively shortly with respect to SHI eligibility. We have an approved housing production plan. We are in the process at the Affordable Housing Trust of actually updating that presently with consultants Judy Barrett and Jen Goldson. Our current plan runs until October of this year, and we anticipate submitting our new plan to DHCD for approval in the May timeframe, and we're on track to do so. Because we have an approved plan, Nantucket's requirement for a year of safe harbor is 0.5% of the 10% requirement. For 1 year, for 2 years, it's 1% of the 10% requirement. So that equates to 24 units or 49 units for 2 years. So if you look at the chart below, over the next 5 years, basically this is laying out how we get to our 490 number, which we anticipate doing within this 5-year period if everything goes to plan, if you will. If you look specifically at this current year, 2021, there are a number of different projects that can contribute toward our next 2-year period of safe harbor. And the principal ones relate to Tacoma Green or Six Fairgrounds, which is currently applied for a tax credit award. And that award is really what would initiate a new, in that case, because there's 64 units, 2-year period of safe harbor. In addition, there is the 31 Fairgrounds project in conjunction with 3 units that Habitat is doing at Benjamin Drive, which would provide 1 year in and of itself. There also may be an opportunity to accelerate already planned production at Richmond, and through a unique set of circumstances, we may actually be able to get more credit toward certification and the subsidized housing inventory out of that one project than a community might normally get from a project of that size. So we anticipate, again, if everything were to line up as shown, that at the end of 2021, we would be at 365 units. Richmond would continue to make steady progress with regard to its rental program, as well as be rolling out the 80% units within its home ownership program. Those 80% units are the only ones that count towards the SHI list when it's ownership. There are additional scattered rentals planned for Habitat and Housing Nantucket, as well as a project by the Trust at Amelia Drive, which would contribute another 4 units. So you can see at the bottom of that chart, what are the contributing units toward safe harbor periods coming up. We would anticipate going into a new 2-year period in 2021. So the fact that there are only 7 contributing in 2022 wouldn't necessarily be material, as the new period would run until 2023.
Work out for you to put
I'm sorry. And so the next slide, if you could move down, Rick. This is just sort of a graphic illustration of what I was just speaking to with regard to our current period of safe harbor and planned upcoming periods of safe harbor. And below that is a chart simply denoting the money spent to date from the 25 million that was appropriated by town meeting at annual town meeting in 2019. As the committee is aware, following the approval of those appropriations, the Affordable Housing Trust set up the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee, which spent some time on developing 3 strategy for the thoughtful deployment of these funds, as well as efficient deployment of them. And we believe that we have gone about doing so as we have committed to various projects. You can see that the 135, 137 Orange Street property acquisition occurred last year at 3.6 million. That simply is for the land portion of that. There's a portion of the funds that have gone toward the development of 2 units at 31 Beachgrass Road by Habitat. We are about to close on some property, which the board again may be aware of with regard to UMass location, Vesper Lane. 31 Fairgrounds represents a collaborative a project between Housing Nantucket, the trust, and a local developer to develop 22 units, which I spoke about a few moments ago. You can see there's an allocation toward the development of the units at Amelia Drive, as well as an allocation held for the Richmond acceleration. So in total, we will have expended roughly 23 million of the 25 million appropriated by the end of this fiscal year. And so that is in part what is contributing to the request for the $7.5 million appropriation. Those monies would basically allow us to have the local subsidy available to plan for the 135, 137 Orange Street development, which would contribute again to that period of safe harbor in 2023-24. I think maybe I will stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Tucker. What I'd actually like to prefer to do and to save the questions as we go through article by article. Thank you. So now on the first article to be discussed, which is 24, the Affordable Housing Trust, the 475,000, the appropriation. Rick, I think we can stop screen sharing now. Thank you. And Brian, should Tucker carry on, or would you step in at this point?
Tucker can continue at this point. My only comment.
Oh, sorry, wrong Brian. Sorry, Brian Sullivan. I'm sorry. Apologies. I meant Brian Turbot because it's a select board. It's a select board article. Thank you.
I would concur that with Brian Sullivan. That
you know, the Brians are in alignment. This is just.
And the town manager and myself are also certainly available for questions after.
Thank you, Brian Turbot. I'm gonna have to now make sure I know which Brian I'm calling out. So Tucker, if you want to walk us through the logic of Article 23, please. The 475,000 appropriation.
Sure. Again, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. And I know Brian Turbot would do this much better, but so the logic is fairly straightforward with respect to this. This is really establishing an operating budget for, call it the housing office. As you can see, there's quite a bit of activity going on. We anticipate the need for some expanded staff that would serve actually not only the housing side of things, but the real estate side as well. We have been running at approximately, actually, it's a little bit north of $150,000 a year that we've given out in the through the closing cost assistance program. That is a program members will recall is a no interest loan that goes toward income restricted purchases up to 175% AMI, where those monies are repaid when the home turns over. So they do get recycled over the long term. We have allocations in there as well for professional services. We, as an example, I mentioned the update we're doing to the housing production plan. We're spending roughly $50,000 on services like that annually. We also have a need with regard to Orange Street and the UMass property a little further down the road, the old fire station property, for professional services in the realm of, you know, architecture and design as we plan for how those projects might look and get community input. We have additional allocations included for marketing, advertising. We feel it's very important, the trust feels it's very important to up our communications game with the public. We think we try to keep people informed, but we realize that there's probably more that we could do in that area and are eager to do so. There is actually an allocation in there toward office space. Back when this budget was developed, the town is in need of additional space with some expanded departments. And so there was an allocation included in there toward that. And I think that would really conclude my remarks at the moment.
Thank you, Tucker. Finance Committee, questions for Tucker? Peter Schaefer?
Yeah, Tucker, just first off, just as an aside, I know I see this stuff more often than most people do, yet I couldn't tell you the definition of Tacoma Green versus Surfside Crossing, you know, other than what I read in the newspaper. It might make sense for you guys to put out something on a monthly basis, an update on what's going on and what you're thinking about and what you're spending your money on. I think if people are more informed, it might be easier for you to get cooperation. I think the second thing is really a question on this. What does the state use as a definition of year-round housing?
It's really a determination by the census process. So when you are polled, if you will, with the census form, you indicate a determination on your form whether you are using a property as a year-round, as your primary residence or not. And there is some cross-referencing information that goes on in terms of follow-up after the initial form is sent in or filled out online, I guess somewhat to verify, but that is a US Census process.
So again, what is the definition? Does it mean that the same people have to live in the same house for 12 months?
Peter, I don't want to give you the wrong answer. So if I can confirm for you how they define it following this meeting, I would definitely do that.
Okay, thanks, Tucker.
Peter, are you all set?
Yep.
Jill, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I've got the 475,000, Tucker, is that something you're going to ask for the same amount every year? I'm just a little confused, like why I can't get budgeted into the budget.
Yeah, this would be something that we would be looking toward being part of the annual budget going forward.
And it's for staffing, housing, office space, but also you're saying design services? And then 175 you're saying are for loan assistance?
150 for closing cost assistance, and we're calling it like professional services, which would, include legal, design, consultants. There's Dr. Tiffany Manuel is a consultant the trust looked at bringing in last year before, COVID hit. And actually, much to Mr. Schaefer's point, like, she is a guru in communications that we, would like, particularly around housing, that we would like to work with.
So you want to spend about this amount of money every single year? Is that what you're saying? Just for Affordable Housing Trust Fund office?
Yes.
And the things that they need to support that. So our budget going forward needs to find, $500,000 every year outside of, what we have.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Chris Klowacki, Peter Schaefer, I'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay.
Do we have the detail on this somewhere? I was trying to find it through the packet, but do we have the numbers that Tucker's quoting that make up the 475? Do we have the backup?
We don't have it to hand right this minute. I'm quite sure we can get it from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure why, to Jill's point, I'm not sure why we would not subject this to the same level of scrutiny we would any other appropriation of any of the other operating departments. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Schaefer?
Yeah, to Jill's point, you'll need that amount of money on an every year basis, Tucker, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an additional, in this case, an additional article. It could be something, you could raise it from donations, you can raise it from lots of different places, correct?
I agree, it doesn't need to be a separate article, I don't believe. Could it all be raised through donations? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, you generate a certain amount of money on an annual basis. A certain amount comes from the town, a certain amount comes from whatever donations, a certain amount comes from somebody who had you in the will, and then you put that all together and then you figure out what you have to spend your money on. So I would assume that the only reason you would have to do a separate request is if you didn't have enough money in your account to pay it.
That's correct. I'm providing what we need to do the job, essentially. Like how it gets funded, I think, is what we're talking about here today.
Okay, I just think that it should be, it's not necessarily going to be something you're going to ask for every year, even though you might need that amount of money. It might be included in your budget or come from other places. I just want to make sure I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the town appropriation, if you will. So yeah, your point is correct. Like, so for example, with 31 Fairgrounds, when that is up and operational, there will be an income stream, if you will, a return of capital from that to the trust by Housing Nantucket. And that money could be used toward this purpose or deployed toward more of, say, the Orange Street development type of situation.
Thank you, Tucker.
Okay, so are there different requirements? That's my last one, I promise. Okay. Is there different requirements for each project in terms of where you can spend money from, where it comes from?
The sources of money definitely come with different restrictions. For example, CPC money can only serve up to 100% AMI. And different projects can have additional restrictions depending on whether you're seeking, for example, tax credit financing. So in the case of 6 Fairgrounds, those units that are tax credit eligible only can serve 60% AMI and less, but it can have additional additional units, but the 20 units that are tax credit eligible must meet that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
So in order in which I have seen the hands being raised, first Brian Sullivan, then Brooke Moore, then Jill Veith. So Brian Sullivan, please.
Through you, Chair, to Peter's question, or more of a comment. At this point, the Affordable Housing Trust only has one source of revenue. We haven't seen any wills or gifts. It's all of the revenue has come from the town of Nantucket, and so this is mostly operating for this year. If subsequent warrant articles were to pass, there are potential other revenue sources that would be reoccurring, but this is a one-time item and it's not included in a regular reoccurring budget. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Brooke Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, also, just as an additional piece of information, I'm not sure, oftentimes the community confuses us with Housing Nantucket, which is a nonprofit that raises money differently from how we work. We're an extension of a municipal department. So I just wanted to, this is the request that was made for the operations of the trust through a municipal department. It's not a nonprofit that we go out and fundraise to finance operations for.
Thank you, Brooke. Jill?
And this money can this money not go through CPC? Because I just want to remind everybody that in Article 32, the CPC has about 1.5 million also for housing projects on the island. And I can't go through that, I guess. That's why, sorry, I didn't understand that.
Ken, do you want to take that? Please, Ken Bogrand?
No, the CPC procedure is with respect to specific projects and not for operating funds.
But these are projects. I mean, we're spending money on design services for a project, aren't we?
Well, there's a limited amount of CPC money with respect to what is available to be allocated. And so this year, what we did was we in fact met the entire request that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund had to the CPC for the funding of the projects that it was looking forward to.
Yeah, I guess I think it's just odd to separate design or to lump in design services with salaries and office space. I guess maybe that's where I'm a little concerned about how it's all getting put together, if that makes sense. It sounds like design services to me, I would think that's included in the 25 million or, you know, something around that for the building costs.
Well, the 20 of the 25 million has different criteria than the 5 million, which comes from the CPC, as well as the yearly allocations of the CPC to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Brian Sullivan had his hand up, but he disappeared. So I don't know if he's on a screen I can't see. So Allison Mitchell, you had your hand up.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair, through you, Madam Chair. And maybe this is a question Tucker can answer, but I was under the impression that the design services had more to do with graphic design and branding work for the trust itself and communications, not that it had to do with kind of design and architectural work per project, but maybe Tucker can verify that.
Thank you, Allison.
Yes, so Madam Chair, it's really, you know, both, you could say. I mean, we're talking about marketing and communications and design in the manner that Ali just spoke about, but as well to like put a finer point on what Jill was bringing up. So if we're seeking design for a specific project, you can have those funds associated with call it the 25 million or the 7.5 million, but we're also trying to explore the possibility of combining a couple of sites to give us access to greater financing in a way that, as far as we're aware, hasn't been done before in the state. And so it's more conceptual. So that's maybe where the difference is coming in.
Thank you, Tucker. Peter McEachern, and then Christy, and then Brian Sullivan.
Madam Chair, through you, may I just request, I think Chris and Jill have already tried, but why don't we move on and make a request from Tucker and from Brian that they itemize the line items that make up the 475 between different expense accounts before we make any motion to approve or not.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you,
This is
Peter.
Penny Dice.
As I said, we won't be making motions on any of these articles tonight due to the fact that the challenges that we had in the last few days with email. So at this point, I think we will move on to the next because, you know, we've spent some amount. Stephen, before I do?
Yes, please. A question to Libby or to Brian Turbett, please. Where does town administration see this operating budget being funded from on a go-forward basis? Certainly, it won't be left to annual requests through individual warrant articles. Should this come under plus or where else do we see this living?
Brian, let me start and then you can supplement. I think we see this being most likely its own category in Article 8, the regular general fund budget. It's, you know, it's been kind of new and we haven't really had the backup until very recently to make it a ongoing line item like that. But I think we're seeing that now we do. So I think we put it forward as a regular departmental budget going forward. And it would be funded out of general revenues. Brian Turbett can supplement that if need be.
No, that's pretty much the way we would envision it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Christy Ferrantella, if you have something new to add to this, please. Otherwise, we're moving on. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick clarification to Jill's questions about the CPC funding. That's an application we put through the Affordable Housing Trust, but the 1.5 million generally goes to Habitat for Humanity and Housing Nantucket. And so it's really important to distinguish between CPC funds, which are going to the nonprofits to help us supplement what the town can do, versus what this budget item is, which is for town operations. And I just want to remind everybody that the #1 strategic goal for the select board is affordable housing. And it's something that we haven't put funding forward in the town budget year to year to support this. So it's something that I think we need to bring focus to. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I mean, whilst we haven't put operational funding toward it, we have dedicated 25 million toward it. So it's not that we haven't put money toward affordable housing in the town of Nantucket. So thank you. Okay, now we're on to the next article, which is Article 24, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, $7.5 million appropriation. And unless I see a different hand, I believe, Tucker, you're back up again. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This can be relatively brief, I think, but as mentioned before, we have monies in the pipeline for the projects that I outlined with regard to our upcoming periods of our upcoming period, let's say, of safe harbor. But we want to be in position to plan for what comes next after that 2 years. So with DHCD, I probably should have mentioned before, the most safe harbor a community can accumulate at one time is 2 years. So you're kind of constantly needing to plan for the expiration and beginning of the next stretch. So these funds, we believe, would allow us to locally subsidize the development at 135 and 137 Orange Street, which we would plan to be approximately 24 units, again, a year of safe harbor. Someone might ask the question, well, why would you not go after tax credit money for that? There are a couple of reasons that you wouldn't do it exclusively. One is that when you do a tax credit project, you have to reach critical mass to get an award, which means you have to have at least 20 units of tax credit eligible units. And as mentioned earlier, that means it needs to be at 60% AMI or less. So the trust's general approach to affordable housing is we believe in mixed income projects. If Orange Street is only 24 units and at least 20 of them need to be at 60% AMI, it would be a fairly homogeneous income level that we would be serving at the one location. We would prefer to see tiers of affordability, and that takes local subsidy. The other reason with respect to safe harbor planning, you wouldn't necessarily want to rely on the tax credit award process is it is a very competitive process. You rarely would get an award the first year you applied. You would need to apply at least twice. The timing of it is not guaranteed in terms of when the awards are made. They're generally made sometime between May and August, but it isn't a specific date, hard date, year over year. So you would not want to be in the position of having the award fall after the expiration of your current period. As well, Nantucket, I mean, we believe that Six Fairgrounds is actually in fairly good position to receive an award in the current round. It applied once before, so this is actually the second time that it's gone in. It was held up for a couple of years because of the lawsuits, but it checks a lot of boxes. It should score highly. And if it does get an award, again, because it's such a competitive process, I believe there are 60 projects that applied this year. It might be several years before Nantucket got another award from the tax credit pool. So that is why we feel it is important to have this $7.5 million available locally to proceed according to our own pace. We believe that this would get the job done as far as the local subsidy at that site. If it happened that the developer needed less than that, obviously there are future plans which it can be utilized, any balance to be utilized in.
Okay, Finance Committee, questions? Jill, and then Chris?
I think Tucker, did I hear you? Is this, can you get the state to pay you back this money?
The state would not pay this money back, no.
So there's no way to go for tax credits later and make them retroactive or make them line up with the timing that you need?
I'm not aware that you can get retroactive credit. I don't believe that's possible. But in terms of lining up with the timing that one needed, is it possible it could happen? Absolutely, it's possible that it can happen. But I would say it's a big roll of the dice.
Right, because we're counting on these units from, is it Fairgrounds or Orange Street being developed? Those are the units that you want. On the chart, I can't remember which came first. One was 2 years from now. I think Fairgrounds was first, maybe.
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to make a comment about the big picture because it's all kind of crystallizing because you're explaining things and it's very, very helpful. Thank you. But between Article 32, which is 1.5 million through CPC, Article 23, 475, Article 24 at 7.5. I mean, we're looking at about $9.5 million that we're asking the taxpayers to fund for affordable housing before we even get to the Stabilization Fund of Article 38 and Brooks Article 97. Is that right to you? And maybe it's more than that. Those are just the only things I saw in the warrant.
I'm not aware where the 1.5 figure from the CPC.
Well, I hear what Christy's saying. A lot of that's housing, Nantucket, and Habitat, but those are affordable projects and Sachem's Path loans, and that's the CPC money in Article 32. It's 800, 296, and 350 broken down in that article. And I just want to make the point that, you know, the voters voted for the 25 million. We're basically coming back and piecemealing it, asking for about 9.5 million to go towards affordable housing. I realize that in your world, that's separate from breaking down the shy money. I understand that. But I just, you know, to most people, their world is affordable housing money, right? That's kind of how they think about it. And then we have 2 more articles to consider as well on top of that, which could be as much as $3, $4, $5 million a year in perpetuity, or I guess until the funds expire. So that's really my larger comment. Maybe Brian can break it down differently.
Thank you, Jill. Brian Turbot, you unmuted, so I'm guessing you're raising your hand.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just want to make one point of clarification with regard to Article 32 with the CPC. The $296,000 of funding is for a project that's already occurred. It's the accumulation of the debt service that we'll hold in reserve to pay off for Sachem's Path. So it's not going to any affordable housing today or into the future. It's for projects that have already occurred. And the $350,000 is money that was already appropriated as part of the 500,000 and the CPC, as they historically have done when they've had a bond authorization, they allocate money every year to set it aside so that when we permanently borrow, we pay down a portion by that time. So those aren't necessarily money that are specifically directed immediately for this because they've already been allocated. The 350 is part of the agreement that we had with the CPC and the way Ken has typically done these when they've authorized borrowing projects. So the 350 is actually part of the payment towards the 5 million that was already authorized. And the 296 is just, we're putting into reserve the total amount for the remaining amount of the Sachem's Path bonds.
Okay, so you're saying that's money that was already allocated. It's just now showing up on the books?
Yes.
Yeah, but then we still have about 800,000. That's
correct. But I just want to make sure that there's a point.
Yeah, I just want people to understand. It's important to me to explain and to make sure I'm getting it right. That we've allocated 25 million. Now we're looking at, I guess, closer to 8.7 million plus the 2 articles that we're going to talk about going forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Jill. Anybody else from Finance Committee? Okay, Brooke, did you want to say something? Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, Brooke, before you do, Chris Glowacki. I'm sorry, Chris, I forgot that you had raised your hand.
That's okay. I'm just trying to tie the 7.5 back to the slides that Tucker showed in the beginning. So looking at slide 2 and these projects, is it that the 7.5 is construction subsidies necessary on top of, was the 3.6 the land purchase?
That's correct, Chris.
And so how much money is on this page in this timeline? What's the total amount needed to get all these projects done?
So we're anticipating in order to complete Orange Street, say UMass, and the old fire station site, which is a little further down the road, but those collectively, in addition to what's happening with Richmond and Six Fairgrounds, would get us to the 10%. And the total required for subsidy, if we got a tax credit award toward the old fire station site or a combination of that and say UMass, it's 19.5 million in subsidy for those 3 projects.
So that's 19.5 on top of the 22.8 total here?
That's correct.
Which is a balance of 2. So the ask we should be prepared for in the coming years is 7.5 is about half of it. Is that?
Yeah, a little less than half. Yep.
And that gets us to the the shy minimum, but no further. Is that correct?
Yes, that's more or less correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Brooke, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it might be helpful for me to contextualize all of this about all of the things we're doing at the trust. So the CPC money, when we go in, we went in last September. Several years ago, it used to be that Housing Nantucket and Habitat for Humanity made their own individual applications to the CPC for funding. And what we've done is we've streamlined that so that the trust makes those requests to CPC for those units which are generally priced below 100% area median income. So CPC is a logical source for funding for those projects. So now the reason we did that is because often Habitat didn't know when they might get land, or Habitat or Housing Nantucket didn't know when they might get access to a house to move, or any of these things. And it was very difficult for them to go to the CPC because they were tying it to a specific project, and there's one time a year when they could go to the CPC to request funding. So the CPC and all of the nonprofits and the trust have worked together over the last 4 years to come up with a system whereby the Affordable Housing Trust makes the application to the CPC. The CPC grants to the trust, and then the trust has those funds available on a timely basis for the nonprofits to apply to us for the financing and support they need to make those houses reality for families. And so I think it's important for people to understand that that's sort of a separate and distinct piece of this financing picture that we put together that utilizes the CPC funds for Habitat and Housing Nantucket projects primarily. And then the $7.5 million we're asking for is basically what I like to think of. Tucker hates it when I use this word, sort of an insurance policy that we know we have the cash in the bank to offer the subsidy for the development of the next round of units that we need to be eligible for certification for safe harbor in a timely manner, to make sure that we have the flexibility to line up the application for those units to DHCD in a way that our timeline is not broken and therefore leaves us vulnerable to 40B applications. So a 2-year look ahead is what we need to do in order to line things up properly, because it takes 2 years to figure out what you're going to do on a property, make sure you're lining it up at the right time, that you're applying to DHCD at the right moment. And there are so many variables to this equation. I adopted the phrase the other day, we don't go to the safe harbor store and buy safe harbor. It's really complex, and much of it is out of our control. So knowing well enough in advance that we have the funding to prepare for that development 2 years down the road to keep us in safe harbor is critical for staying in safe harbor. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Brooke. And what is DHCD?
I'm sorry, it's the Department of Community Development and Housing, Housing and Community Development. It's the authorizing agency in Boston that certifies our subsidized housing, monitors, certifies our subsidized housing, and determines whether we're in safe harbor or not. Thanks for asking me to clarify.
Thank you, Brooke. And are there any other further questions on this article from the Finance Committee? Chris Golacki?
Yeah, just one other quick one. The $6.75 million note on 31 Fairgrounds, that's in the 10.3 in the column?
That's correct.
And what's the term on that? I mean, the 20 years, 40 years, what's the?
50 year.
50?
50, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, now just for everyone who's on, and I'm very happy to see 65 participants. This is I love civic engagement from everyone. We're going to get through all the articles first from the sponsors, have Finance Committee ask their questions, and then I will open it for public comment, at which point you can ask a question about any of the articles we've just discussed. But I think it's more appropriate for us to hear from all of the sponsors of housing related articles first, and then we'll go back. So Mr. Reed, you're up, please, with the Affordable and Year-Round Housing Stabilization Fund. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much indeed. This is an article that I have submitted to establish a stabilization fund, which would be funded by taking 2/3, which is an arbitrary percentage, but which I think is an appropriate amount, and I'll get into that as we go through, of the lodging tax, the hotel, motel, short-term rental tax, to which short-term rentals were added, as we all know, a couple of years ago, to be set into the stabilization fund for the purpose of affordable and year-round housing. Affordable housing within the definition of that term, and as we all know, the need for year-round housing that is at a higher level, a higher income level, up to 150 or even 200% in some contexts. The point here is that obviously the funds are badly needed for the purpose. I think this provides a steady stream of funds that would be available for the towns and related affordable housing initiatives. The statute specifically provides, and this would require two-thirds vote of town meeting, that the stabilization fund would be established. The town has accepted the legislation that enables such a fund to be created. We believe that the addition of short-term rental to the lodging tax a couple of years ago presents a unique opportunity for the town to establish such a fund and to have a really very large and substantial and steady stream of funds available for the purpose. We think that somewhere in the range of $6 million a year may be able to be generated by this purpose. We don't know, obviously, from year to year what total rents are going to be, and therefore the total short-term rental tax. I'm taking the 2/3 on the basis that we believe that short-term rentals generate about 2/3 of the tax that will be generated in every year. A substantial amount has been added as a result of that, and the rents that are subject to that tax are in many cases very large, and I think will dwarf the amount that's derived from the hotels and lodging houses. That's essentially it. We think, again, that this is an appropriate thing, that the use of funds derived from the rental housing industry and lodging generally for affordable housing is that there's a logical connection there. It's appropriate. The people who work in the industry serving these sources of revenue for the town are in many cases people who will benefit from the provision of affordable and year-round housing. And thinking this through, I felt that this would be an appropriate way to establish a fund that would both be substantial and would be reliable to be generating these funds in each year without dipping into other revenues that the town might have available.
Thank you very much. And may I call you Arthur, by the way?
You certainly may.
Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Brian, I have a question for you. Brian Turbot, sorry, I have to get my Brian's clear. Brian Turbot, I have a question for you. So what would be the impact? Number one, please explain Stabilization Fund for anyone who's on this Zoom meeting that might not understand what it is and how it works. And then secondly, do you know the anticipated impact of creating this fund in the timeline? I believe it'll be created this fiscal year. Is that correct?
So what's been proposed is a special purpose stabilization fund, which is allowed, which can direct a minimum of 25% of a revenue source, such as the short-term occupancy, into a dedicated particular funding mechanism, which has been proposed for affordable housing. If it were passed at town meeting, it would not actually start until 7/1, and it would Then receipts received after 7/1, if I understood the article correctly, would then be placed into that from when the Commonwealth pays us. 23% would go to, 33% would go to the general fund, excuse me, and 67% would go into this fund that had been established. One of the key points is that this fund would not be available till the next town meeting to be spent. So this revenue source would not immediately be available to the Affordable Housing Trust. We would have to appropriate that at a town meeting, which would have to happen in the annual town meeting in 2022. It takes a 2/3 majority to get the money out. So if 2/3 of the voters if they don't reach 2/3 of the voters at an annual town meeting for the plan, then the money doesn't come out. I can tell you right off the bat, at a minimum, this would put right now, based on what we had received to date in this year, this would put just over a $2.7 million hole in Article 8 when we go to town meeting this year, if this were to pass. And that there is no levy capacity to actually make that up in the budget. That would require drastic cuts across across the entire spectrum of town operations. There's no way to make that up. Where we don't have the levy capacity. We budgeted to within about 600,000. The 2.7 takes into account the 600,000 being used. This would not be an easy thing for town administration to make up. I mean, I understand that this may be perceived as a steady funding source, but it really is if our goal is to support affordable housing, a mechanism that requires a 2/3 majority at town meeting to get out of it, to spend it, is not, in my mind, the mechanism that works.
Why does it have to, Brian Turbot, why does it have to go into a special stabilization fund?
It wouldn't. And, the town manager and I have had other conversations about potentially allocating some of that, of the occupancy tax to accomplish some of this. I don't think that it would ever be at the $6 million level, because the amount in the budget currently would mean that we would have to bring in over $11 million in rooms occupancy tax. And I don't envision that scenario. So there are other ways to get at this other than this fund that would require a very substantial amount of town meeting to agree with whatever the plan is put forth to take out the money that's been put into it through the annual town meeting.
Thank you, Brian. Finance Committee, questions? John Giorgio, welcome to Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say one other thing to tag on to what Brian said. One of the things about this statute is once you dedicate a funding source to a stabilization fund, you cannot change that for 3 years. So it's important that you get this right up front, because if, as Brian is discussing, you will have an immediate deficit, and you will not be able to get your tax rate set and send out your tax bills next year until you have made up that funding gap of 2.7 million. And you're not going to be able to do that at this town meeting. You wouldn't want to anticipate passage of that. So you would have to call a special town meeting in the fall or call for an override vote in order to set your tax rate.
Thank you, John.
So if I may just follow up with one other question. So then the question becomes, is the 2/3% the right number?
Peter Schaefer, you were first, then Jill.
Okay. Arthur, was your plan in writing this article to use it as an offset against the land bank article?
Not specifically. I hadn't thought of it that way, but as soon as these things all came into play, it occurred to me that this was an excellent way of offsetting that. I am certainly a supporter of keeping the land bank at the 2%, keeping their entire 2% percentage. And I think that this is a more appropriate way of dealing with it than dipping into the land bank funds. But that's a separate point. And by the way, one thing, if I may, while I'm speaking on this, understanding the point that Brian Turbot and John Giorgio made about the timing of all of this, I'm wondering whether it would be more appropriate to have this, instead of taking effect with the 2022 fiscal year, have it take effect in 2023, so that there would be the opportunity to plan in advance for the timing, to have the article pass this year, but with it relating to the 2023 fiscal year as the first year in which it would be in effect.
Thank you, Arthur. Can you read my notes? Because I wrote down, what about postponing the start to avoid a budget shortfall this year? So you must be able to read the notes I have on my desk right this minute.
Oh, okay. I have some extrasensory powers, but I didn't realize they went quite that far.
Excellent. I'll ask you for winning lottery tickets later. Jill, you had your hand up?
Yeah, you all are kind of answering some of my questions, so that's great. One of them I have probably directed at Brian. Brian, I think you were able to break down I know you're not going to love this, but I think you can break down the commercial properties that we get money from versus the residential properties where we get short-term rental money from. I think most people associate the short-term rental term with residential properties, whereas the lodging tax is covering all of them. Does that seem right to you? And the reason I bring this up is because the short-term rental money really didn't start until last year, whereas you were definitely counting on the money from the hotels and the B&Bs for the previous year. So that's been a steady funding source, something you've counted on. This new money is very, very new. And so I don't feel like Mr. Reed was willing to amend his article for a year forward, since we've already planned for this year, but I don't really see that as being embedded money in the budget for a long time. And so I'm just wondering if maybe there's an amendment to be made or to be considered of dividing that money out from the commercial properties versus these residential properties.
You still get to the same place. You still get to a massive budget shortfall because there's about $5 million of room occupancy tax built into the budget right now, okay? So it doesn't matter, a couple points. It doesn't matter if we delay the implementation, you will still be cutting many millions of dollars of services out of the budget that the residents, whether you're a visitor or you're a resident of the island, have come to expect on the island, A. B, we budget somewhat conservatively, which does allow us to fund a lot of capital projects with free cash. It allows us to maintain reserves that have allowed us to reach a AAA bond rating. Taking 67% of a revenue source that the general fund has, whether or not we've budgeted every penny in a year or not, still has wide-ranging implications on the management of the town. Because you also have to remember that local estimated receipts is a number that we budget, but if in any year, if we don't meet that number, we have an automatic hit to free cash and we have an automatic raise in the subsequent year's tax rate for that shortfall. And we can't budget past those numbers on a year-over-year basis when setting the tax rate. So while 100% may not be in the actual operating budget, it all goes, the surplus that may or may not come in on an annual basis is all used in how we manage the town and provide all of the service, be it a capital expenditure through free cash, be it an operating budget, be it everything that we do. So I don't just look at the number in the budget, Jill, and say this is what it is. The entire expectation is what I'm trying to manage to for the town.
I know, and I think what I'm kind of saying, I'm not trying to argue with you, Brian, but we're trying to look for a revenue stream for affordable housing. You got a lot more money, and none of this seemed to have come out through this year's budget. And I'm just, so now we have Article 23 and 24, sorry. And I think it's a little overwhelming to the voters at town meeting. That's my suggestion. And I think this personally is a brilliant idea. Whether or not we can do it or not, I think it would behoove us to not really take a strong look at it and consider it, whether you want to change the date it's implemented, the percentage, maybe that should get lower, or if it comes from a commercial property or residential property. Because again, the commercial's been around for a long time. The residential money is new. That's all I'm saying.
Money is fungible from the room's occupancy tax, and it's 67% of the room's occupancy tax. It isn't 67% of one bucket or another. It's 67% of the total money that we receive.
I know, but you can break that down so that you can divide that.
We can, but we're not technically allowed to specifically identify revenue sources, and we're doing all of the room's occupancy tax. That's the way that this has to be done. So what's going into the room, if this were to pass, it doesn't matter what bucket it comes from. Okay, it's going in as that total. The other thing that I really need to stress is the fact that doing this requires a 2/3 majority at town meeting. And if 2/3 of town meeting does not agree with the plan that is presented to take this money out, it doesn't come out, and it sits in this fund, and it's not being used at all. This is, in my opinion,
it expires after 3 years. So, what happens after the 3 years?
No, it doesn't.
Please don't interrupt Brian. And Brian,
Sorry.
Okay, so Brian, I'll let you finish, and then I'll turn it back to you, Jill, if you have further comments. But this is on Zoom. It's not easy for people to follow with the back and forth. So let's please go back to a little bit.
The only thing is that it's a minimum of 3 years if it were to pass. You have to cross the 67% threshold regardless to get the money out. That doesn't change with the 3 years. It's 67% of the town meeting, annual or special, to get it out.
Jill, did you have a follow-up question for Brian?
Yeah, so what I'm asking is if the 2/3 don't vote for it for the 3 years that this stabilization fund is set, what happens to that money?
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would stay in there until 67% of the voters authorized it to come out for a purpose.
But it could come out for a different purpose after 3 years.
John, please, John Giorgio.
If I may, Madam Chairman, just to clarify Jill's question. So when I said 3 years, you can't change the purpose, you can't change the percentage or revoke your acceptance for 3 years. If you do nothing, the money will continue to accumulate in that fund at a rate of 67% of your entire rooms tax. If you found that 67% was too much and it really should be 30%, I'm just picking that number out of the air, you couldn't lower that amount for 3 years. So it's not a sunset. It's a minimum amount of time before you can change your mind.
No, and I think that that's what makes it a really good, more reliable source of funding potentially for affordable housing, and for Brooke and Tucker, who are looking for money to complete these projects to meet our needs. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Chris Glowacki.
Yeah, so I guess I'm also a little concerned about the significance of the 2/3%, because aren't any of these solutions going to require a 2/3%? So the 7.5 million, right, debt override, won't that require a 2/3 vote? So, or do I have that? Am I wrong about that?
No, that's correct, Chris. Any borrowing requires.
So it seems like any angle we have to get at this with any substantive amount of money is going to require a 2/3 vote, and in some cases a ballot vote.
Well, I think the difference that Brian is trying to explain is that with the stabilization fund, there are two 2/3 votes involved. One is to actually establish the dedication, and then going forward, to take the money out of the stabilization fund, will take a 2/3 vote.
No, understood, but I was just trying to make the point, if it was in fact correct, which I think it is, that any angle to sort of create to get town meeting to go along with one of these answers is going to take a 2/3 vote. So I guess the risk of that doesn't loom as large for me. And then just a follow-up question, probably for Brian as well as, is there a sweet spot here that doesn't cause, in percentage terms, it doesn't cause the budget issue, or is that number 0? Meaning, if this were at 33, or do we know if there's a certain amount of money that could be gotten out of here that would make it workable from this year's budget?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that, somewhere between 25 to 30% based on what we've received this year would allow both to work.
So there is some premium available coming out of this. Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions from Finance Committee? Peter Schaefer?
Just a comment. It sounds to me like most of the people on this call who have spoken are in favor of figuring out a way to come up with more money for affordable housing, which, by the way, will be in perpetuity for a long time. It's not going to be done in 3 years. It's going to just keep getting higher, our needs. So I think, perhaps one of the things that we need to put our thinking cap on is, how do we find that revenue source? Because if we're basically in agreement that we have to find a revenue source, where is that going to be, other than what Brooke is proposing right now or what Arthur is proposing?
Thank you, Peter. John Giorgio, please.
So in answer to your question, Peter, I don't know if anyone has considered the other provision of the short-term rental law, which is the ability to assess a community impact fee of up to 3%. But that's only on short-term rentals. That is an option that is available for both professionally managed units and owner-occupied units. I don't know if Arthur considered that as a possibility.
And just for clarification for people, this is the Massachusetts general law of short-term rental. That's where the community impact fee comes from, not the Article 90 that we discussed last Thursday. Thank you. Arthur?
Yeah, with reference to the need to get a 2/3 vote to appropriate the money, there's no question that's the case. However, I would say that I think that the town is very much aware, I think the town meeting and the people of the town in general are very much aware of the need for a reliable source of funds on an ongoing basis for affordable housing. This, as has been said, is an issue that's not going away anytime soon. And I think that the difficulty of getting a 2/3 vote to make that appropriation in any year is greatly overstated. I think, for example, frankly, it's going to be a lot easier to get a 2/3 vote for an appropriation of funds that have already been set aside than to get a 2/3 vote for borrowing authority under any circumstances. Again, this is an issue that is ongoing, and I think we need to look at it that way. And I certainly would be amenable to a recommendation that would have it start in 2023, because I certainly don't want to foul up the town's overall budgeting for the 2022 fiscal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Jill, you had your hand up before?
No, I think I'm good. Sorry. The community impact fee. I did want to hear what Tucker and Brooke thought of that. If I know that's a much lower amount than what we're talking about here on this article, but is that a possibility?
Brooke?
So if I do the math correctly, we're talking about a 3% community impact fee on short-term rentals, which basically would be the equivalent of 50% of the incremental short-term rental revenue. So if we look at what came in under the lodging tax before the short-term rental portion and what came in after, my understanding is that it's about a two-thirds of the current revenue could be accounted to short-term rentals, right? So Brian Turbot, you might be able to help me with the math. So 6% on the short-term rental part equates to, half of 6% would equate to the 3%. So it would be somewhat less than the two-thirds. It would represent about 50% if this article, Mr. Reed's article, passed at 50%. My math says the community impact fee would generate about the same amount as 50% of the current total lodging tax.
The only thing I'd like to point out is that 2019 and 2020 were hardly standard years for collecting lodging tax. So right now, it appears that it's the majority of short-term rentals is funding the lodging tax. And because hotels were fundamentally closed in 2020, starting this month last year, right? So I think one of the challenges of this comes down to we haven't had a consistent number of years running. And so we would know what we're doing here, right? So 67% sounds like a number that's maybe feasible, provided you've had 5 years of history of reasonably normal times. And then you say, okay, I know I'm signing up for $4 million a year because this is how it's shaking out. So I just, people should also just be conscious of, we're talking about percentages of numbers that frankly in the last 2 years are not as reliable as we would potentially like them to be in terms of consistency. So Brian Sullivan, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I'm correct, the Board of Selectmen will have to raise the short-term rental tax by the community impact fee. Is that correct?
John Giorgio.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Will the Board of Selectmen need to raise the short-term rental tax by the 3%? So it would be an additional 3% on top of the 11.7?
Yes, but it wouldn't be the select board. It's town meeting that has to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. So just to follow up, Madam Chair, when the selectmen had the option to, the select board, excuse me, had the option and opportunity to set the short-term rental tax, there was a very lively and active discussion of it only being 2%, not the 6%, which it got set to. At the time the state delivered the money, I spoke against my industry in real estate, who were afraid that it would affect the overall rental basis. It has been absorbed as a luxury tax and has not necessarily affected the tourist community and the rates that they're paying. But that was a hefty conversation at the time. And the Board of Selectmen did choose to go from a 2% tax that they were talking about all the way to 6%. So thus collecting a total of 11.7% without the community impact fee. And if I remember correctly, in the past, some discussion was to save that community impact fee for water quality needs, as was understood by the state when they originally approved the opportunity to tax the short-term rental taxes. So I'm fearful of adding another 3% on to the vacation base if they'll be willing to absorb it in the community. So.
Thank you, Brian. Stephen Morey.
The community impact fee, I believe, and maybe John Giorgio knows, can only be applied to professionally managed units, not to all vacation rentals.
So, Madam Chair, there are two different 3% taxes. The community impact fee, excuse me, the first one is only on professionally managed units. If you accept that at town meeting, then you can then also adopt a 3% community impact fee on owner occupied units.
John,
but that's, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But that's still not all, right? So it would be professionally managed, which is properties owned by an operator who has 2 or more in Nantucket, and then owner occupied units, but it wouldn't be other units, right?
It would only be short-term rental units, if that's your question, Steve.
No, there's still a category. I'm sorry, John. there's still a category of I live off island, I'm not owner occupied, but I have a rental unit. So there's, that category falls in between those two things that Stephen just mentioned, correct?
I don't think so. If you're not occupying the unit, then it's a professionally managed unit.
I don't believe that's true. I think professionally managed is defined as the owner has 2 or more in Nantucket.
And one other point to that, John, my question is, Mr. Reed's article could not be amended to change it to a community impact fee article because it's way outside the scope of his original proposal. So whilst we're all speaking about this as a potential future revenue source, that would have to be an article brought either by a citizen or the select board as part of their normal deliberations in the cycle. And that boat is sailed for us for this particular warrant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, you had another question, and then Chris, I'll get to you. And then Jill, I think you had your hand up as well.
And maybe this is a question that we would need the moderator to answer for us, but would it be within the scope of this article to designate a specific sum of money from the annual receipts as opposed to a percentage of the revenue?
John, please, John Giorgio.
It has to be expressed as a percentage of the revenue, and it cannot be less than 25% of that revenue stream.
Are those requirements because we're talking about a reserve fund? And I ask that because I think a reserve fund, the 2/3 vote, is not insignificant. It's the reason that the statute requires a 2/3 vote for reserve funds, because it's intentionally supposed to be difficult to get money out of those funds.
Stabilization Fund.
Thank you, stabilization funds.
Is there a question there, Steve? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is, why does it have to be a minimum of 25% of the revenue source? Is it because we're putting it into a stabilization fund?
The simple answer is that the statute that applies here says it has to be a minimum of 25%.
That's right.
Which, by the way, this is all in the Stabilization Fund statute in Massachusetts. But the simple answer, Steve, is because the statute says it has to be a minimum of 25%.
Thank you.
Chris Glowacki.
Yeah, can I ask if it'd be appropriate to get a quick update on the real estate transfer tax legislation related to affordable housing? Did I miss something? Did that die, or is that potentially in this mix?
Tucker Holland, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So our local home rule petition was resubmitted by Representative Fernandez into the current session. There are now multiple municipalities who have introduced similar legislation, most notably Boston. And there is a statewide transfer fee coalition working to advance enabling legislation for any municipality to do something in the vein of what we would like done. So recent calls with our Cape and Islands delegation, I'll just quote a few words from the discussion. There definitely is momentum around it. That does not mean by any stretch that it's guaranteed to pass, but it is something that is getting greater and greater attention. So it's not dead.
And may I ask if there were projections around what the annual revenues from that, as we had proposed it, would be?
As we had proposed it in recent, based on recent year activity, obviously 2020 was an outlier,
Sure.
but it would generate roughly $3.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Jill, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, I guess so. This is clarifying what Brian saying earlier. The 25% is just looked at as lodging tax. It's not divided up. Because the way Arthur said short-term rentals.
No, the 25% minimum is on the lodging tax. It cannot be restricted to just short-term rentals.
Okay, that's why I'm confused. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for, on this particular article? Brooke, because we want to get to the land bank article and it's 5:33 and look at all the discussion we've had up till now. So I'm guessing that we will be bringing the land bank article right to the close of meetings. So quickly, and then we'll move on.
So not to eat my own time, as it were. I just had a couple of clarification questions through you, Madam Chair, on the stabilization fund. Any change to the portion that goes into the stabilization fund would have to be approved at town meeting with a two-thirds vote, question mark, for town council, please?
Yes.
Okay. And then my second question is, Brian Turbot mentioned that there is the possibility that the finance department and town administration could opt to allocate in the general fund budget a portion of this revenue stream to fund the Affordable Housing Trust in future years, obviously not this year. I wanted to ask what the process for that would be, if there's any special process.
I'll let the town manager take it, but. we can talk
Brian and
about
I have been going back and forth about this a little bit, and John is hopefully listening. It's not really the finance department and town administration. It would be perhaps a recommendation on our part to the select board, and the select board would put that forward. What I think one thing we could potentially consider for fiscal 22 would be in the finance committee motion to Article 8, which is the general fund operating budget, to add an amount of X, say $2 million, for the housing office, and that could be their operating budget. Revenue to come from general town revenues, which include the room occupancy tax.
Thank you, Libby. All set, Brooke? Thank you. Okay. I am going to now move on to Brooke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to state that I am now recusing myself from the Affordable Housing Trust meeting that is in process and speaking as a private citizen and sponsor of Article 97. So I wanted to tell the members of the Finance Committee and the public today why I submitted this article in the first place. And sorry, I'm going to read because I'm a little nervous, which is so uncharacteristic of me, actually. We've had a housing crisis for a long time. We have not made a commitment as to direction or paying for ways to solve this crisis, which has accelerated rapidly since I first set foot on Nantucket in 1988. The headlines have never changed. They've gotten worse. The Affordable Housing Trust now, at the request of the Finance Committee, where I have gone every year the last 4 years in my capacity on that board, has a really good grasp of the depth and breadth of the problem. And we've presenting background data, and we will be getting even more of that with our completed housing production plan. We can't delay anymore. The problem is getting worse. I worry that there's no consensus around a commitment to fund this problem, the solutions to this problem. The housing bank bill has been unable to pass. I don't know how many of you know, but the first attempt at a housing bank transfer fee was in 1986. It has been attempted 11 times since 1986. And there is a strong lobby from the Massachusetts Realtors and the Cape and Island Realtors, very strong, very well-funded lobby against any additional transfer fees. We've been told in Boston every year I've gone that the answer is reallocate the transfer fee that you already have. And I just received through Brian Sullivan an email from the Cape and Islands Realtors Board saying that they would support Article 97 through to the State House. They have committed that now in an email. It's not just anecdotal. I think it's time for us to have a conversation about relative priorities in our community, and maybe finally to give just service to the desperate need of our year-round community for housing at multiple income levels at both the rental and home ownership efforts. I would now, if you wouldn't mind, Madam Chair, like to ask Howard Dickler to talk a little bit about our research into the financial implications for the land bank of the article as proposed.
Okay, Brooke, that's fine. Thank you. Howard, would you like to speak, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear.
So Brooke asked me to review land bank finances very briefly so that we're all talking about the same thing. All of the numbers that I will cite are matters of public record, and I'll tell you where they come from. So the overall financial condition of the land bank as of the December 31st, 2020 report, which is unaudited because it's the middle of their fiscal year, shows that the land bank's assets total nearly 39 million. This is probably the strongest financial statement they've ever had, and we all know that it's due to the very unusual real estate year that just passed. Nevertheless, they have nearly 39 million versus total outstanding debts of 16 million. So that leaves approximately 23 million available for any purpose whatsoever. But really, for the purpose of this discussion, I want to just do a conceptual trick so that we can discuss income and expenses in the future in a very uncomplicated way. So I'm going to assume that all of the debt is taken care of by existing funds so that future budgets do not have to include that debt. So now, how do you estimate what the future income will be and the future expenses? We obviously have to ignore the transfer fee outlier that just occurred. So the solution that we chose was to look at the annual reports for the land bank for the years 2016 through 2020 and take an average, a 5-year average of those. In the case of the transfer fee, it was a pretty tight range. They varied from a low of 18.6 to a high of 23.1. And the average transfer fee per year is 20.2 million. The land bank operating is also tight. It varied from a low of 2.4 to a high of 2.9, and the average is 2.7. Now, remember, we left out debt payment out of that. So what does that consist of? That consists of administration, both salaries and other expenses, and it also incorporates all of the land bank projects, such as parking for their properties, trails, parks, playgrounds, etc. There's one other item in the cost, and that is the subsidy that goes to running the Gulf operations. This has varied from a low of 0.36 million to a high of 0.89 million, and averages 0.63 million, or 630,000. So if you add the operating expenses and the Gulf subsidy, the average expenses for the land bank for the 5 years are 3.3 million. So if the income is 20 million and the expenses are a little over 3, personally, I would increase that to 4, because that gives you a lot of leeway in case your expenses for a project are high or something else occurs. That leaves 16 million. So now we can talk about what would be the effect of this particular article. Well, it's asking for 25% of the income, a minor amount. So That would leave 15 million for the land bank. If you take away 3 for operation or 4 for operations, that leaves 11. The 11 would be available for, obviously, property acquisition. If you didn't have this article, then there would be 16 available for property acquisition. So Brooke mentioned prioritization for the needs of the island. What is more important, whether to acquire property somewhat faster because you have more money for acquisition, or to do it somewhat slower, but meet another need, a very critical need for the island. I'd be glad to answer questions, and I'll turn it back to Brooke.
Thank you, Howard. I'm just going to conclude, if that's okay, Madam Chair, for just a minute or so.
Please, Brooke, thank you.
Thanks. So in conclusion, Tucker, representing the Affordable Housing Trust, has presented all of us today with details of how the trust expended the $25 million we were allocated in 2019, the plans the trust has for getting us to 10% requirement under Chapter 40B, as well as additional programs envisioned to address the lack of access to homeownership opportunities. I just want to cite a couple of figures that I found telling. The current multiple of area median income to median home price, and I'm not taking 2020, I'm looking at 2019 again because 2020 is an outlier, is 16. Weston, the most expensive community surrounding Boston, has the same multiple of area median income. But if you live and work in Boston, you don't have to live in Weston. You have many, many choices of where to live and where to acquire a home. That's not true for folks who live and work on Nantucket. And if I take 2020 into account, the multiple is now 22 times the median income at a 2.5 million median home, single family home price sale last year. I think we've shown that the current operations of the land bank will not be devastated by this article. It will result in a slower rate of property acquisition, perhaps a reduction of about 30% for 20 years. And a couple other important statistics. Vacant land in 1987, just a few years into the land bank existence, was 53%. The current number is 4.8%. There isn't land left that's undeveloped on Nantucket. Conservation properties and easements currently cover 51.7% of Nantucket's acreage, more than half. The AMI versus sales price from 2014 to 2020, AMI has gone up 150%, and average sales price has gone up 203%. Home ownership is getting farther and farther out of reach for Nantucket residents who work here and live here. Big public policy decisions demand hard choices from our community leaders and our voters. I believe it is time to really commit to preserving what I know to be our most valuable asset, our year-round community, the people who make the economy run. Who will be here to serve, to protect, to provide the exceptional experience that our seasonal visitors have come to expect of us on Nantucket? Isn't it time for us to make some reasonable sacrifice to make sure they have enough safe and stable housing? I believe that sharing this transfer fee resource for a time-limited 20 years is a viable option, and that's why I came to you today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you very much. Finance Committee, now I'm looking for a raise of hands for any questions that you have for Brooke. And there are none. Except, well, Jill.
Jeez.
Come on, Jill. Come on, Jill. Actually, yes, please ask questions. And I would definitely like to get some public commentary in before we have to end. So just a heads up for everybody. Thank you.
That's fine. Brooke, I would love to hear your view, because today what's so great about what Denise did was that she put all the housing articles today. And I would really love you to give us guidance about how we can meet the need, exactly how much money you think you need every year for the next 5 years, definitely what you need for this year. And, you know, how that can be a more stable source of funding. And if you're flexible on the percentage for the land bank article that you wrote. Those are my main questions.
Thank you, Jill. And then Peter Schaefer, you'll be next, but I'll let Brooke please answer, and then I'll ask, then Peter can ask you his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This article was proposed when there were no other options on the table, I'll be honest with you. There are now other options on the table, and I think it's this committee's job to figure out what the best combination of funding is for the Affordable Housing Trust. It's a big problem. It needs a big solution. And I am not wedded to the percentage that was proposed in this. $5 million of revenue is what we believe can get the job done in a substantive and long-term way. And some combination of funding, to me, in fact, might even be better than what I think of sometimes as a single source aquifer, because each of these funding streams has various restrictions on them. 2/3 to get it out of a stabilization fund. Debt exclusions require 2/3 plus a ballot vote. The housing bank bill is run up against a brick wall at the State House. We can debate what's the appropriate sharing of this land bank fee for housing. So if I were to paint the picture of the perfect funding stream for the trust, it would be perhaps a combination of all of them. I think that's hard to explain to the voters, but there's reasons. Each of them have different restrictions. So that's kind of my answer. So I do in my heart have flexibility, but I just really want us to support the funding we need for the Affordable Housing Trust.
Thank you.
But you're saying you would like $5 million a year in perpetuity, really?
No, I mean, my proposal is 20 years, so not in perpetuity.
Okay, so $100 million.
Yep. Yep.
Peter Schaefer, then Stephen Morey.
Peter, you're muted.
Sorry. Brooke, I think you're being a little naive if you think in 20 years it's going to be taken care of. I think you should be thinking of this thing on a perpetuity basis forever. There's going to be renovations, there's going to be things that have to be redone, whatever. I think that two things, and I think you agree with, you don't care where the money comes from. You just want the easiest access to the money and being able to get the amount of money that you need, that $5 million a year. I think the second thing is, whatever you do, it should be from one source. I think it gets very complicated when you start thinking about putting this program together, and part of it's going to come here and part of it's going to come from there and whatever. I think you should try to think of it as a single access, like you're doing in your present article. So, going forward, I think, the more open you are and the more flexible you are, I think the bigger your chances of accomplishing something here.
Thank you.
May I respond, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Peter, I wish we could get people to commit to funding in perpetuity. $100 million is the big ask. It's a huge ask. And I think that we will prove the need long-term, but planning long-term requires knowing that money's coming. And I think I sent you guys a chart of the various constraints on the different funding sources that are available to us. And so none of them is ideal. And I get the idea that single source is easier, but we have operated at the trust with multiple funding sources ever since I started. We manage buckets of money that come from different sources already. And that's something we're doing already. So I see no problem with that in terms of execution in that regard. Selling and explaining to the community why is the job that I have to undertake, we have to undertake between now and town meeting, and I think we can successfully do that.
Brooke, one quick point. The documents you sent got lost in the email diaspora that we just had. So they will be forwarded to Finance Committee once I can get through my 90 emails that are sitting there. So I did get them over to Rick so they can be posted to the packet upcoming. So they will get to everybody that they should, but they didn't get to them before this meeting. And no, Jill, not yet. Stephen, you had your hand up?
Yeah.
Chris, and then Jill, or Jill.
Thanks. If all of these measures were to pass, if we, if Mr. Reed's article were to pass, if the housing bank bill, which, despite your statements here, I think Tucker has painted a different picture that it's not run into a stone wall, at least not recently. I mean, when I was up at the State House the first year it went, certainly it was not well received, but it sounds like the climate is changing in that regard. But there are several other long-term, if not in perpetuity, funding sources being described here. We also have an ask for almost $500,000 for an operating budget, and that's for the money and the projects that you have to manage now. What does it look like if all of these funding sources come to fruition at the same time? It's not always better to have, more at your disposal right now if you can't manage it, if you don't have the infrastructure to deal with it all.
So I would respond that I'm not sure what infrastructure we need beyond what we're doing already, because our planning for implementation and spending of that money has a timeline that it can't all be done at once, or we would fall out of safe harbor before Richmond Development finishes building half of our units of our 10%. So we can't do it all at once. Even if we had the money today, it would be a mistake to suddenly go out and contract to build the other half of the SHI list required units and build them all, because we would fall out of safe harbor under Chapter 40B, even though we knew Richmond was going to bring us in their complete build out to the 10% or above. So we're going to have to do this over time regardless. And I never expected, frankly, that we would get all of these articles passed in their entirety at their recommendations at town meeting. That is not, and I think that's partly hopefully the job of the Finance Committee to help parse out Mr. Reed has said he's flexible on the circumstances of his article. I've stated that I'm flexible on the circumstances of my article. So I think that there's a way to craft this so it's not all, but it's enough for us to get the job done in a significant way. And I think I just want to add one piece of this, that without an additional funding stream, we can do nothing on the home ownership space. Nothing. If all we're getting is money to build out safe harbor, that leaves everybody who needs help acquiring real estate on this island to stay here. And we have the skeleton built of an equity sharing program that would set aside deed restricted home ownership units as year-round residents in perpetuity. But that requires a subsidy of $250,000 to $300,000 a unit, which is where we're headed with the long-term funding stream.
And that program is or is not included in your ideal $5 million a year?
It is included.
Okay, so from all sources, $5 million a year is the target.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Stephen. Jill, you were next, and then Chris, you're after Jill.
Yeah, Brooke, you're so passionate about all this, and I know that you've always had many creative ideas, and that you're tenacious, and you've talked and met with so many people over the years. Can you tell everybody, have you ever worked with? Sorry, I don't know what that is. Can you tell me, have you ever worked with the land bank to buy a property and maybe look at changing it through zoning so that they can manage protected space and you can develop another side? Or any of those conversations going on? have they been helpful to say, hey, we'd like to do this so that you can do that, and working together?
I'm going to ask Tucker Holland to respond to that question. Sorry, Tucker, I'm going to throw you under the bus.
I should not have returned from vacation. To answer your question, there's been outreach to the land bank to look at doing things where, let's say within their lane, much as the land bank on the vineyard has worked with housing entities such as Island Housing Trust on the vineyard, to further both conservation of land and conservation of people goals. So far, we haven't collectively agreed upon something to do. We've thrown a few different ideas up to the land bank, but we're entering really kind of our first collaboration with 31 Fairgrounds, where they're not making a financial contribution per se, but they are holding the conservation restriction under the flex development provision that project is being developed under. So, there's relationships take time, and there's conversation, and we hope that there will be more of those types of opportunities and actual projects that we can jointly participate in together, again, within our respective realms.
Thank you, Tucker. Jill, you all set?
And then my last question, which maybe Tucker, you want to answer, is since you've been allocated the 25 million, which I know is spoken for, but are there actual people that have gone into buildings who are living in homes since then? It looks like everything you spent was on undeveloped land or buying some things, but it looked like there were a couple things in there that that were already built that you bought. So I just wanted to clarify that also, for there's so many people on, have families actually directly benefited yet from the 25 million?
Thank you for the question. So there are a couple of the Habitat homes are, under construction right now. The folks are not living in them yet. As you can understand, particularly you, Jill, as a developer, development doesn't happen overnight. But I would say, there are several significant projects as we went through underway, such that within the next approximately 12 months, roughly 49 families, of various household sizes will be in housing that was created from those funds, in addition to those funds contributing to more families having housing as a result a little after that point.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you, Jill. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of quick things. I was having a hard time following the description of, if you could do all this at once, you need to phase it out for safe harbor, but isn't everything on this wish list page, wouldn't that get you to the threshold where you wouldn't need safe harbor anymore? Doesn't that get you the full way?
So to answer that question, Chris, Richmond Development, which will contribute half of our 10%, has a construction timeline that finishes in 2025. So we must create 24 units of SHI eligible housing per year, each year, until we get to 10%. And unless we overbuild beyond the 10% and get there without Richmond, we have to wait for Richmond to catch up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's their timing that you can't do it all at once and influence their timing. So you have to phase it out. That does, thank you, that clears that up. So along those same lines, as it relates to the SHI list, have you looked at how many years of the land bank share you would need to get to the shy, to finance getting to the shy percentage versus going above and beyond the shy list requirements to other affordable housing needs?
So the math is pretty simple. It's about 20 million, 19 to 20 million to build out under Neighborhood First for the subsidized housing inventory. So at an average of $20 million of revenue at the land bank, that's 4 years.
Okay,
but I'd like to reiterate that the need extends in our community so far beyond what the state requires under Chapter 4.
Yep. So I understand that, but we do spend a lot of time focusing on the shy piece. So I think it is relevant to think about what's the shy component and what's other.
Yep.
And then finally, I don't think I heard a direct, and I'm not sure if Peter asked a question or if it was a statement, but he raised the issue of whether this is land bank specific from your perspective. There's something better about taking this money from the land bank or other sources. And I don't think I heard an answer on that.
So the advantage of the land bank fee, frankly, is it is the most flexible source of funding that could come to the trust of all the options on the table. And I'll explain that by saying that the current mandate of the Affordable Housing Trust is to create year-round housing up to 200% area median income. So in terms of AMI level, the housing bank bill is restricted at 175. So that leaves us, if we only got the housing bank bill, it leaves us with a gap in funding for families at 176 to 200% AMI. CPC funding is only to 100% AMI. So those are sort of the AMI restrictions on the various buckets. And then of course, there's the, how do we get it implemented? What's that process, right? So is it 1 step, 2 step? And you'll see, I have this all laid out in a chart that never got to you apparently. Actually, I found it in your packet that was posted, so it's in there. It's page 15 of the supplemental packet. So, and then of course, we've already talked about the stabilization fund and the 2/3 requirement to get that money out. So that is a restriction not only to process, but timing. So even if it were to pass this year, it wouldn't be available at the earliest the following fiscal year, subject to a 2/3 vote at town meeting.
Right, but isn't a land bank going to take a home bill petition or something? Doesn't the land bank have to go to the state capitol?
Absolutely. And
so that's going to take much longer.
Potentially or not, because the organization that has lobbied hard against the housing bank bill has stated they won't lobby hard against this.
But there's still a process that takes legislative discussion.
It's absolutely a process, and it's probably a year, maybe 2 years. Yes, absolutely.
And then the 25 million that you got was completely flexible, and the 7.5 million would be completely flexible as well.
That not exactly, because the way the warrant articles were worded, they were only eligible for shy list housing. So we would, if we did continue to use debt exclusion as the model for funding the trust, we would have to word those articles differently to give more flexibility. But I believe, and maybe Brian Turbot can answer this, can we use borrowing? What are the limitations on borrowing in general, never mind how the warrant article is written as to AMI or shy list?
We'd probably just have to run it by bond council. I mean, we've run all of this by bond council to get their approval. So I think that we probably could make some other changes to borrowings in the future to do some of the other things that you need to do. One thing borrowings can never be used for is operational expenses. So I can tell you that which we've had conversations about anyway too. But some of the other programs may be able to fit into a borrowing, and we had preliminary discussions with bond council about those anyway, as a preliminary discussion to lay the groundwork for how it would work in the future.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm all set, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Tucker, I'm going to go to you, and then I want to open it up for public comment, and then I need to make an announcement about the extension of this meeting because we have a 6 o'clock stop, but I want to make sure everyone who has their hand raised has an opportunity to speak today. Okay, so Tucker, if you can speak, just make it snappy, please.
Very quickly, just a clarification for Chris's question. The $5 million of the 25 is restricted at 100% AMI only, up to.
Thank you, Tucker. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we are, as you all know, we're scheduled until 6 o'clock. However, I don't, with the great discussion that we've been having, I want to make sure everybody's heard tonight. We will be looking at these articles again for making motions on March 23rd. So we won't make any motions tonight. And the next available slot in our calendar will be March 23rd. So everyone, I'll look forward to seeing another 60 people on March 23rd at a minimum. So what I'd like to do is, Brian Sullivan, I'm going to go to you first, and then I'm going to go to Eric Savetsky, and then I'm going to take everybody else in order that you appeared. So Brian Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comment and question was clarified through the board's comments and questions just about the restriction levels on how the money was used. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all the FinCom members for all their public service and countless hours they're putting into reviewing all of the articles. My name is Eric Savetsky. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Land Bank and its commissioners and their 37 years of successful conservation history, speaking in unanimous opposition to Article 97. In 1983, the Land Bank was proposed by the town and authorized by the legislature as the first in the nation innovation to address pressing overdevelopment on the island. It worked and it continues to work extremely well. Tying public land preservation funding in direct proportion to the degree of market-based real estate development has become a national model. Bill Klein got it right back in 1983. The Land Bank 2% has and continues to be the right number for conservation of land for open space purposes. Programs that aren't efficient or don't work should be modified, but Article 97 would radically alter the Land Bank. It's important for us to remember that after approving the Land Bank legislation for Nantucket and later Martha's Vineyard, the legislature rejected 52 home rule petitions from municipalities across the state seeking the same economic model. We should not politically risk something that has been so successful and served Nantucket residents so well. Whether you're a year-round resident looking for a nice place to hike, fish, or stroll, or a summer visitor looking for an accessible beach, or a local farmer looking to provide local food stocks, or a Nantucket worker looking for an affordable place to play golf, or a young family looking for a fun and safe place to go visit a playground, the Land Bank has provided all of these and more. Now 3,400 acres of public open space. But beyond the obvious, think about the Land Bank has enabled the town to protect the drinking water aquifer, preserve its ecological diversity, and ensure that the island's carrying capacity is not overwhelmed. Our current needs, some of which were not envisioned back in 1983, now include the new emerging challenge of ensuring climate resiliency, a truly existential threat to the island. Our land preservation and growth management challenges remain great and daunting. Affordable housing is also a critical challenge on the island. We know that, we live here. And the Land Bank, consistent with its statutory charge, has worked with multiple housing entities to solve some of the housing problems where we can. But solutions to our affordable housing needs cannot simply be to rob and ignore our daunting land preservation and growth management needs. We encourage the town and its voters to seriously consider the 4 other articles, which amount to over $14 million in potential affordable housing funding that are on this year's warrant. As individuals, we'll be supporting some of those articles as well. But tonight we urge the FinCom members and the residents of Nantucket to vote against Article 97 in the interest of keeping our town finances and bond rating stable, in the interests of maintaining equilibrium in our island's carrying capacity, in the interest of keeping one of our strongest tools available for aquifer protection and island climate resiliency, in the interest of expanding affordable, active recreational opportunities for year-round residents, and in the interest of preserving for generations to come the landscapes and natural assets that make Nantucket's character and environment so unique. We ask you to prevent pitting worthwhile public policies against each other. Please vote against Article 97, and thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I can't remember if I opened the meeting for public comment, so I'm just open the meeting for public comment. Thank you. And Robert Williams, you're next up, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to put a fine point on this perception of a slightly slower land acquisition rate, although it's well-intentioned up against, you know, the affordable housing issue. The land bank does more than acquire land. And as a former commissioner, and I'll be brief, as a former commissioner of the golf committee at the Mycomet Golf Course, I've got to tell you, I don't know how that's perceived by FinCom, but that is a huge resource to the economy of this island. We had in 2019, 23,000 rounds of golf. And last year we had over 30,000 rounds of golf. And we're actually at the point now in that facility, now that we have a new clubhouse and everything, where we narrowly missed a demonstration on Broad Street last year of not getting tee times. So I think in the future, the land bank is going to have enormous pressure to reinvest and to bring that golf facility back into balance with the enormous usage that it gets. And for those that think maybe golf is sort of a luxury, come out on a Tuesday afternoon and see the 80 kids that are out there. They're not playing golf, I'll tell you that, but it's just a tremendous resource that has nothing to do with land acquisition. The second reason is the enormous effort that the land bank has put into partnering with the Nantucket Pond Coalition, which I'm involved with, in restoring and protecting the great ponds of Nantucket. Along with CPC and the town, they've been a major donor and a huge restoration effort of the great ponds in Nantucket, including getting rid of 60 acres of invasive Phragmites on the shorelines, getting rid of excessive vegetation, very, very involved with water quality. We're now talking about dredging Mycomet in the early stages of that, turning into a swimming hole like in the old days. So these are things people don't realize that the land bank is involved in, and it had nothing to do with land acquisition. The third and final comment briefly is this issue of resiliency, coastal resiliency. I've been working, I have a home down in Florida with Steve Bacall at Princeton University, and I'm pretty familiar with all of the forecasts of what's going to happen to us all in the next 30 or 40 years. And I don't think there's another organization on the island that would have the scale to address what is going to be indescribably expensive for Nantucket to keep it the way it is. So I don't so much see it as affordable housing versus slightly lower land acquisition. I think the function that the land bank serves is critical to the island. It's quintessential to what being on Nantucket is in terms of the pond, in terms of outdoor recreation, and we strongly support a recommendation against Article 97 and to keep the land bank the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next up is RJ Turcutt. We can't hear you, RJ. Try now. Still can't hear you. I'm going to jump to Aidan Feeney and we'll come back to you. Thank you, RJ. Aidan, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I'm here just to give my perspective on, as someone who grew up on the island and returned to the island, really, and thanks to the efforts of the land bank. I grew up here. My family actually doesn't own a house or property here. And when I left, I didn't think I'd come back. But thanks to the land bank and Sustainable Nantucket, I've been able to start a business on the island and create a living back in the place that I love. And, it's tough for me to I don't want to come across like I'm against affordable housing because it's really near and dear to me. But the ethic that Nantucket has had towards conservation is really the thing that I've been most proud of when I think about where I'm from. And I just don't want to see that ever decline. And it's very important to me. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Aiden. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank
Posey?
you.
Posey, you're next. Posey Constable.
Greetings all, and I will also try to be brief. When I moved to Nantucket exactly a year ago, before COVID kind of took the island down, I took on the role as Managing Director of Sustainable Nantucket, and I'm really echoing what Aiden has to say. We have other farmers and participants out at our Community Farm Institute on the line who will be equally passionate about the partnership that we have been afforded by the land bank to allow us to succeed. You know, they are our landlord on our 8-acre Community Farm Institute out at Hummock Pond Road. And they have thoughtfully and judiciously taken the strategic plan that our board and the farmers have put together and put in front of them. And through their help allowed us to achieve, you know, a very viable business for farmers on the island. And it's been a benefit to the entire community, what we've been able to achieve over the last few years through their stewardship. You know, we've been increasing locally produced produce. It has been the mainstay of activity in town last year, where the Nantucket Farmers and Artisans Market was the only thing to do downtown, and was a big draw for why people came into the market, having all that fresh produce stacked up. It was just a thing of beauty. They helped us to get permitted and build a new farm stand out at the farm, where we not only now have 4 farmers and beekeepers selling their wares on an honor-based system, and it's created a little food corridor down there, but it's also the place where we are, through the generosity of Community Preservation Corp in building this structure, have workshops, have the ability to bring on speakers to help raise new farmers in this space. So we wouldn't have been able to do any of this without the stewardship and sponsorship of the land bank. And while I also have served as a brief member of the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee for affordable housing, and I believe we have a big burden to create infrastructure for our neighbors. I don't think creating this kind of loophole in the land bank's charter to fund affordable housing is the way to go, because were that to happen here, anybody else could then take a crack at you know, taking funding away from the land bank and all of its critical missions. So I would strongly urge the Finance Committee not move forward with Local 97. Thank you.
Thank you, Posey. RJ, are you ready?
Hear me now?
Yes, that's my dog
Amazing.
barking at you, RJ. I'm sorry.
Awesome. All right. Sorry about those technical difficulties. My name is RJ Turcott, speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Land Council. Just to reiterate the comment letter that's already in the packet by Emily Molden, we oppose Article 97 and support continuing to have the 2% transfer fee in its entirety go to the land bank. The financials for the land bank look very good right now, and the system is working. But as we move into this coastal resilience planning and looking at how Nantucket can be better as the sea levels rise, things of that nature, these properties aren't cheap and they're not getting cheaper. And if there's a critical piece that the land bank is able and positioned to purchase, that money disappears very quickly. And they have an enormous job, enormous task of protecting the aquifer as well as serving the public. So the Land Council recommends that this committee oppose Article 97. Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Next up is Robin Nides.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's been a lot of opposition to Article 97. So let me go back to Article 38, if I may, for a second, and make an observation and a suggestion. We wholeheartedly endorse Arthur Reed's article as representing many of the payers of short-term rental tax, having met last night in a group meeting with Brooke Marr, and we're also going to have a meeting with Allie Mitchell this week. as payers of this tax, we fully endorse 38 in some form, whatever is the right percentage, whatever can get through. The other suggestion I wanted to make to leave you with is for FinCom and Brooke and Brian to think big. What I mean by that is with the new short-term rental tax, forgetting for the moment the different earmarks and the grabs at what should be $8 to $9 million of new revenue this year, which is a huge percentage jump in any town's budget. Our recommendation would be to sit down with 2 or 3 municipal finance specialists, because that amount of money could fund projects many multiples larger, which could then generate new revenues and finance further construction. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Arthur, you're next, please.
Thank you. I was around in 1983 and I worked with Bill Klein on drafting the initial land bank legislation and also helped with some of the legislative work on getting it put through on Beacon Hill. So I have a long history with the land bank. I've worked with them in many different capacities, not always on the same side of things, but almost always. And also as counsel to the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, which I've been throughout this whole period. The land bank is very important. The conservation on Nantucket is very important. If we hadn't had the foresight of the Nantucket Conservation Foundation and then the land bank to preserve Nantucket, to preserve the outlying lands of Nantucket that started with the foundation back in the 1960s, Nantucket would be nothing like what it is like today. The pressures would have resulted in development all over the open moors. I shudder to think at what Nantucket would have been like. Now, the land bank has acquired a great deal of land, and fortunately, a great deal of Nantucket is now held in conservation. There are still important parcels of land. They may not be as big in acreage as some of the ones that have already been acquired, but there are still significant parcels of land on Nantucket that should be acquired. And if the land bank or other conservation organizations isn't able to acquire them, they will wind up being developed. And once the land is developed, it's gone. The opportunity, slowing down of the process of acquiring conservation land just does not work. You can't slow it down. You have to be out there nimbly able to step in and acquire the land for conservation purposes while it's there to be acquired. I can think of cases where that should have happened over the years before the land bank was in existence, and the difficulties of raising money for a private organization as opposed to the steady funding stream that the land bank has had. And it's a shame that some of those parcels were not acquired back at the time. I strongly support the land bank. It's important that it stay in existence. Of course, we recognize, and you know from my article, that I also feel passionately about the need for affordable housing on the island. But you don't rob Peter to pay Paul. And you need to let each need have its own funding basis and do what needs to be done for the benefit of the island, but not pitting conservation against affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur. Next is Allison Mitchell, and then Deanne Atherton, and then Rick Atherton. So I see you. Don't worry, you'll get your turn. Allison, so
Thank you,
please.
Madam Chair. I'm speaking as a private citizen. I am a signer of the land bank article. I am a supporter of it. Most of the things that I've written have already been said, but I just want to reiterate, thinking about the basics of this article, it's the one article that would not affect the general fund, would not affect the town budget, would not affect the town taxpayers, which I think are 3 very important things to consider. I'm a huge fan of the land bank. Who isn't? I literally look out the window of my rental and I see the land that they own on the other side of Appleton, and I'm very grateful for it. But I think something that's important to note is that the land bank itself really over the past 15 or 20 years has made their own statements, whether or not they meant to, on the importance of workforce housing. In 2007, they purchased a property at 6 West Myacomet Road, and they left the house there, and it's housed employees of Myacomet Golf Course ever since. In the 2020 annual report, Land Bank Chairman Neil Patterson ended the report stating that year they were able to build an employee dormitory that was constructed to ensure the availability of quality housing for essential golf course employees. So that sounds like they spent their money for workforce housing, which is great. I'm really happy about that. I'm a housing advocate. In a letter sent by Myacomet Management to the club membership last week, Nantucket Golf Management President Alan Costa again mentioned how important that employee dormitory was and how it was funded by the Land Bank, and that's why the Land Bank was so important. And lastly, located at 159 Hummock Pond Road is a portion of the Gardner property, which I'm sure we all have enjoyed. I know I have many times. It has always had 3 dwellings on it, as far as I know, because I lived in one many years ago, over a decade ago. There were 3 dwellings for Land Bank and Myacomet staff housing. At one time or another, all 3 were just very small cottages, 1 or 2 bedrooms, likely moved from other properties to this spot. The one I lived in was very small and was likely that. But since then, at least 2 of the dwellings have been renovated. One of them, I believe, is still under construction to accommodate for more bedrooms. They look like single family homes now, again, which is fantastic because I'm a housing advocate and I thoroughly believe that the people who are contributing to Nantucket and the community deserve somewhere to live. I just think it's interesting, and it's just worth pointing out that the Land Bank clearly understands the importance of subsidizing housing for their workforce, for the workforce of Myacomet. And what we're doing really as housing advocates is asking a source that many of us who support this article believe would be the most efficient, the quickest, and really the most flexible money for us to get to the shy list in perpetuity, to then move towards workforce housing, home ownership opportunities, which is one of the select board's top strategic goals. I just think it's important that we discuss this based on the merits of what the article says and what the community needs. I hear everybody talking about how fantastic these trails are and this land is, and they are, but who are they for if the year-round community that does get to go walk them in January, February, March, April is no longer here? Anybody who's heard me speak before, my story is the token. I've lived here my whole life. I've never owned a home. I likely won't be able to own a home. My husband's on the fire department. I work at one of the schools. We are exactly the family that cannot buy into this market. We are exactly the family that needs an equity sharing program or a down payment assistance program. And I just think that we need to make sure that we're thinking about the merits of these funding opportunities and not thinking about what the Land Bank did in the past 30 years as a reason to not think about how important this funding could be to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you for your very open and candid comments. Deanne Atherton?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? I am speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, and we have prepared a written statement that we will get to you and share with you in writing, and I will not go into it now, but I will just be brief and make one point that I think we all need to stop and think about. There have been references tonight to the fact, the far-sightedness of Nantucket citizens and planners back in the 60s and 70s about the need to conserve land. I would say that right now at this moment, the issue that is going to be facing Nantucket for at least the next 50 years will be how to deal with sea level rise and climate change. The town is just in the middle of a major initiative to develop a coastal resiliency plan. We have a team of over 35 consultants working with citizens to develop the plan, which should be completed by next fall. we may be uniquely positioned to have a strong, well-funded land bank that can provide tools for us as a very vulnerable coastal island community to deal with this existential threat. So to defund or reduce the funding for the land bank at this moment in time would just be imprudent at best. So we hope that the Finance Committee will not support this article.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. Rick Atherton?
Gee, sorry, Deanne, have to follow you.
Rick, stop in the Stop and Shop on your way home.
No, just send me the list. So look, I had a couple of comments, if you don't mind. One, and just, I don't think I need to remind the Finance Committee and the Affordable Housing Trust people, because I speak as one who had a significant role in achieving town meeting and the voters' approval of the $20 million. But I think it's unfortunate, quite frankly, to have to be faced with the kind of choice the land bank takeaway is giving us. It should never have come to that. I also think in a more general way that there are, and all you have to do is listen to the conversation tonight, there are far too many unknowns and variables for the community to think about long-term dedicated funding of these significant amounts. I would support the town's recommendation for $7.5 million. We could do it again next year. I think the citizens would appreciate that. There are also many philosophical issues about affordable housing, about whether or not employers have a primary responsibility. We just heard about the land bank, but there are many private employers who have stepped up over the years. And unfortunately, those numbers just don't get counted, if you will. I think we need to step back a little bit, get to the 10%. I'm not at all convinced that the community wants to go to 20, 30, 40%. That kind of commitment may be what we end up with, but it's not, I don't think we're ready for that yet. Let's get to the 10% and go from there. So I don't support long-term committed dollars. I do support the 7.5. And if we need to do it again next year, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Rima Sherry?
I'm sorry, I missed most of the discussion in the beginning because I was unable to be here, but I have been working on the Affordable Housing Trust for the past 5 years. And the thing I say over and over again is for so long, we've been a fund without funding. And it's always kicked the can down the road. What this article asks, and I'm a proponent of the article and a signer, is open minds, open hearts. You know, can we share some of this income for desperate need? I mean, it is a desperate need and it gets worse every day. I'm sure Brooke shared stories because people call her every day. You know, how do I get housing? I get notes in my mailbox. Do you know of a place to rent? I mean, it's just, I really truly believe, looking at the numbers, that the land bank will continue to function if it doesn't have all of it. If, you know, we get a quarter of the income for a period of years, we can make a real difference in this island community. We're going to take a lot of stress out of the community. Insufficient housing is stress. Overcrowding contributed to COVID. And this is the article, like Allison said it best, that is the most efficient and the easiest. And it's temporary. And there is plenty of money. I mean, there is plenty of money. And yes, okay, coastal resiliency, that's major projects, you know, I understand that. But when did that become part of the land bank's mission? You know, great, wonderful, but put it in the mission, state it. But in the meantime, I'm sorry, hearing about golf when there are people that are homeless, living in cars, can't afford rentals, but they have jobs, they work, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. So, you know, just try to look at things differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. Robin, do you have something else to say? Your hand is still up, or you just didn't take your hand down? Okay, thank you. Eric?
I just wanted to clarify. I appreciate the analysis, financial analysis that Howard and the affordable housing folks did. We did an impact analysis, and the results were a little different, and basically found that if 25% was taken out of our revenue stream, it would basically cut our acquisition funding in half after debt service, after operations, projects, and all of our sort of customary and all those expenses. It basically cuts our acquisition ability in half. So it does have a very substantial impact on our ability to acquire new properties, especially when we're dealing with really expensive waterfront and other valuable open space properties. And there was another point I wanted to make, and now it's slipped my mind. Well, I'll come back again if it comes to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I have to write everything down, so I'm a big proponent of stuff slipping my mind if I don't. Okay, there's no more hands raised. Brooke, except for Brooke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on a few comments that have been made. I want to reiterate what Rima said, is I haven't read that climate or coastal resilience is part of the land bank's mission yet. And before we leap to amending their mission to deal with a problem that's going to be with us for a long time, perhaps we should think about dealing with a problem that has been with us for a long time. The housing crisis existed before the phrase coastal resilience was even created. So I just want to counter that. I also want to point out that someone along the line indicated that this article would impact the town's AAA rating and our financial security. I think it's quite the opposite. It's the only article that doesn't impact town budget, other revenue sources that contribute to the financial viability on an annual basis of the town of Nantucket. It's the only one among them. So I think that we have to be clear on that. And the other thing that I just want to tell a story. Rima said I might have told stories. I've had 9 phone calls this week of families imminently in danger of losing their housing for so many different reasons. Houses being sold where someone's lived in a cottage for 8 years and is now out. A young family, a woman with a brand new baby being put out of an apartment she's been in for 6 years because it's becoming a short-term rental. An employer who relocated their employee to another location off island and then told his family that they have to move out of employee housing. So don't tell me employer housing is the answer. Employer housing under certain circumstances leads to the equivalent of indentured servitude. People should have, there should be enough housing stock on Nantucket where people have the freedom to change their job, alter their family size, retire and downsize without being homeless or without having to leave Nantucket. That is the goal of what we are trying to do at the Affordable Housing Trust. And as I said, I am agnostic as to where the money comes from. Bottom line is, my friend Tucker says, if it's green, it spends. But we need money. And that is my last plea to you as the Finance Committee and to my friends on the Select Board. Let's do this now. Let's stop kicking the can down the road, because people are hurting out there. They are hurting. This is real pain experienced by real people who are afraid to talk about it, because the scuttlebutt in the community is, if you just work harder, you'll get your piece of Nantucket. It's just not true anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Megan Perry.
Thank you very much. I'll be super quick. I wasn't going to comment, but I had sent a very lengthy letter and email to the Select Board, the Land Bank, and to the Affordable Housing Trust on December 6, 2020 with regards to this article. I forwarded it on to the FinCom, and I'm hoping, even though it's not addressed to FinCom, that all members will get a chance to take a look at it. It's just highlighting a very few number of things that the Land Bank does for our community, aside from walking trails, ranging from playgrounds to porta potties at 40th Pole. Land Bank is way more than just trails and conservation land. And I think we will be doing the community just such a terrible act by taking funding away from it. And this is coming from someone who grew up on Nantucket and does not own a home on Nantucket. And I don't know if I ever will, but I'm very much in support of the Land Bank and not removing any funds from them.
Thank you, Megan. And yes, everything that's been sent to us will eventually get posted. Rick Sears has done a hero's job of getting as much out as he can in light of the little bit of a email snafu, as I keep calling it. So trust me that everything we get will get circulated as it should be, posted to our packets. You know, we're really working on making sure all that happens. So thank you for that. Okay. I am going to ask Brian Sullivan to adjourn his Affordable Housing Trust meeting.
If I could take a motion from a member of the trust to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second.
And by roll, Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Brooke Moore,
Aye.
Allison Mitchell,
Aye.
I think Rima Sherry.
Aye.
I'm scrolling through it. I'm not sure if anybody else is on here. Brian Sullivan, aye.
And Penny is on here. Aye.
Oh, thank you, Penny. And Penny Dye was an aye, and Brian Sullivan, aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brian. And we'll be able to do this again on the 23rd of March, now that we have the practice down. So, okay. So I want to say thank you very much for everyone's very interesting and compelling contributions. I think this was very helpful for all of us to have all of these housing articles discussed at the same time. As you can see, it's a complex topic, and if there was a simple solution, we would have been done with this meeting in 15 minutes. So I believe that, you know, as we progress through our deliberations and discussions, we will look at each article one by one, but we'll also try to look at them in totality. It's kind of a balancing act, obviously. So understanding that town meeting does vote on them one by one. So we will have to recommend accordingly. Now, with that, I realize we ran over, which my German heritage is, you know, a little bit nervous about, but that's okay. I've learned to adapt as well. And I want to say thank you to everyone for their contribution tonight. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn from FinCom.
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. And by roll call, Peter McEachern.
Aye.
Thank you. Jill Veith.
Aye.
Chris Glowacki.
Aye.
George Harrington. Stephen Morey.
Aye.
Joe Grouse.
Aye.
Peter Schaefer.
Aye.
And as always, thank you to Rick, to Brian, to Libby for all the support we have for these meetings. It's very much appreciated. And thank you, of course, to my FinCom members for your dedication to working through all these topics. So thank you, everyone. We have another meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock and another meeting on Thursday at 4 o'clock. And yeah, well, we have meetings Monday, Tuesday, Thursday at 4 o'clock until the end of March. So, and we do post in our agenda, which articles will be under discussion on the day. So you can check on the town website if there's any other articles you'd like to contribute to. And I very much appreciate the community engagement. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Denise. Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
Dennis.